Hey there, welcome back to the Back Pocket Creative. Thank you for listening, watching, sharing, whatever you do to support me. I appreciate it. It means a lot. So this week, we're going to be talking about burnout and how, as a creative, you're constantly fighting burnout. I think for me, I know that all the way looking back to when I was a volunteer to now, I can see how burnout has actually looked different. Burnout can sometimes come in the things that I'm doing. Burnout can sometimes come in the people I'm interacting with, the people I'm working with, or it can just become a specific type of thing I do can create burnout. A repetition of something, anything like that. So the biggest thing to do is if burnout is happening to you or has happened, or you feel like you're on the verge of burnout, it's common. It's going to happen. It's not something to feel ashamed of. Don't let people belittle you or make people you feel like you're different or wrong for being burnt out or feeling like you're being burnt out. Totally normal, something that everyone deals with, and if they don't deal with it, they're lying more than likely that they've never dealt with it before, because my point is all of this is there is a way that you can mitigate burnout to where you don't feel the effects of it, but every person's different. And every person deals with burnout in their own particular way. And so for me, the biggest thing I've had to do in my life is identify when burnout happens. Check myself, identify why it happened, identify why it's happening, and knowing as it happens when you're on the verge of it versus in it. Because when you're on the verge of it, you can kind of stop yourself. There's things that you can do that's unique to yourself to hold yourself from getting burnt out. And for me, one of the biggest things that I noticed early on was a lot of times it was my environment. It was the people I was around. And very early on in my career, I know it was specifically linked to the way certain people treated me. And to be honest, it was because, and I talked about this in episode 2, but where my self-worth was in the praises of others. And so what was happening is I was getting beaten down by the word of others. And what it was doing is it was creating burnout in me, because where I had loved to do what I was doing, it became almost like I was having to push through mud just to do it mentally. And even sometimes just getting up and saying, okay, I'm getting to do this today. And I used to be super excited and super happy about getting to do this type of stuff and this project. And all of a sudden it was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to sit in bed. I just want to play video games. I just want to go hang out with somebody. I don't want to do this anymore. And so where I learned that I personally had to do things differently is where I know if I'm starting to feel burnout, I have to change my environment. And a lot of times that can just be the intake of things. A lot of times that can be the physical environment, as in you need to quit your job. And I've been there, and I'm glad I made the steps that I did when I made that decision. Granted, in the time of me making that decision, and really 6 months after, I still questioned whether it was the right decision. But a year later, year and a half later, I know, okay, hey, that was the right call for me. It maybe could have been fixed, but I knew I was on the verge of burnout, and it was anybody's fault but my own. Honestly, I had allowed this stuff of like, I guess, me not feeling like I was measuring up correctly. And so I would beat myself down. And by beating myself down over things, I began to get burnt out, not want to do it anymore, not want to do what I was doing. And to be honest, I just got to a point where I was like, this isn't healthy for me to stay in this position anymore. And so I made the decision to leave. And that is how I dealt with that particular stage of burnout in my life. And that's not how I've dealt with burnout every time, like not even remotely close. That was the first time I ever dealt with burnout by actually leaving my environment. And other times I've dealt with burnout, it was just simply boundaries. It was just realigning myself with my needs physically, my wife's needs, and not overbearing things in one area. So in the sense of I was pouring all of my time in one direction, and I was so off kilter. And so the reason I was burning out was because I was spending so much time in one area, and I just needed to realign myself. And then, hey, I'm good. And, a lot of times the way I see it is burnout is sometimes a choice. You choose to set yourself in a position where you feel like you have to do something. And the trap, especially if you're a volunteer or you're someone that's, an assistant or something like that to somebody, you hold the power to say yes or no to coming to a project, to coming to a situation, to working a certain amount of hours. You hold the keys. So what I learned as a volunteer is if I'm getting burnt out, it is nobody but my own fault. Now, yes, a good leader will see, hey, you need to take a little bit of time off, or hey, how about you come back in about 2 weeks, or, hey, how about you take a step back, something like that. And I've had to do that in a lot of people's lives. Say, hey, how about you not run this week, or how about you go do something different, and then also, in that sense, you have to be emotionally intelligent. You have to know as a leader when someone needs time. Now, problem is some leaders just straight up don't care. And I've encountered that my entire life. They don't care. They'll run you ragged and run you in the ground. That's why it's your fault if you get to a point where you're burned out as a volunteer or as a assistant or somebody that's doing, it's because you have to set the boundary, because they won't, because they don't care, because they're not the ones that are going through it. They're not the ones that I've experienced leaders who are like, oh, you can't burn out. Burnout's not real. But don't talk about that. That's not a real thing. And those leaders are wrong. And the great thing about it is they can be wrong and you can be right by setting boundaries. And so, I think a lot of times when our leadership or when people in our lives are like that, we'll allow them to dictate our happiness, our life, when we should be dictating how they use us and the times that they use us. And so that's one thing, I encourage you, if you're in a situation like that, it's a very specific situation, but you set the tone. You're your own body, and the one thing, is tough is with ministry. A lot of times it can be said, hey, well, it's service to God. It's service to God. Well, you're serving God. Well, sometimes there can be serving God, and you can be in your house and you can be reading your Bible and praying. That can be serving God too. It doesn't have to be working 10 hours, 15 hours a week, not getting paid as a volunteer, and being manipulated by your leader. Very specific situation, but just saying, I've seen it happen. I've seen it unfold in front of me. And if you're in that situation, you set the boundary, you set what you're going to do. And I have a lot of friends that are volunteers that don't get paid, that work in creative spaces, that they'll straight up say, nope, ain't doing it. And the leadership be like, well, why not? They know that they're not, if they do that thing and they spend that time and they get in that invested, it's going to burn them out. So they protect themselves against bitterness, burnout, the whole gamut. And so that's what I just encourage you in that space. And granted, I don't even know why I'm belaboring this, but there's someone out there in that situation. Just know you're the one that controls that. No one controls you. You control you, and you can say no. And so one thing I find with burnout is it's repetition. So it's nothing new coming into the picture. And so the reason that there's one time I experienced burnout, and I know other friends have experienced burnout, where they're just doing the same thing over and over again, over and over again, over and over again. And it's just this pattern, and it's the same thing. And it's just, it's so mundane. And it's like, man, I used to love this. Now I hate it because I'm just doing it all the time. It's the same thing. There's nothing new. And so the best thing you got to do is you got to break the cycle. You got to break the pattern. You have to break something to fix yourself. And a lot of times I know, like, all that looks like for me a lot of times is just doing whatever my daily tasks are that are repetitive, doing it differently and changing what I'm doing, or maybe moving this that I do on Monday to a Friday. Like, you have to take control of what has become stale and mundane that could cause you to burn out. And you have to act before you burn out, because a lot of people's burnout is tied to their schedule, tied to the mundane, like I do this all the time, and repetition. And while repetition is good, it's also good to mix things up. Change is good. And a lot of creatives, they don't like change because they get good in one space and they just stick in that one space, and that's it. That's all they know, and they're good at it. So why do something else when I'm good at this? And so that's what I've learned I've had to do, is I've had to cut the cycle. I've had to say, I'm changing this. And even if it's like, hey, you're doing a specific project and it's like a weekly project, monthly project, and it's just not going anywhere, add something to it. Add pizzazz. Take something, once again, and I've said it in the first episode, but out of your back pocket that you save, that you've kind of grown over time, and use that to prevent burnout by spicing something up. Because that's where I think predominantly a lot of burnout happens, is when there's no ascension. There's no going up. It's just the same thing over and over again. It's the same loop. It's the same circle. So break the circle, break the loop, and break out of your burnout, and do it preemptively. If you see that you're in a cycle, make a change so that you don't have to get to the edge or even into bitterness and into burnout, because bitterness causes burnout. Burnout causes bitterness. They're very much tied together. You can begin to hate what you do. You can begin to hate who you work with, who you work for, and it can just be a messy business. So it's better that you take control of it first and cut it at the root than you prolong these feelings and these cycles. So as I finish up here, the one thing I find myself doing is, a while ago, there's someone in my life that said that he was in this process of doing these things, and he said that he would do the things he hated so he could get to do the project he loved. And a lot of times, that's how you prevent burnout. You got to find something you love, and you need to get to it. So in the sense of, hey, okay, I'm going to be in this circle, I'm doing this thing, I'm in this pattern, and then I'm going to get a chance where I'm going to do this passion project. And that's how you break the cycle. Because a lot of times there's things, especially if you're a paid creative, you're in a space where you're paid to do something or perform, then you may not be able to break that cycle in that sense, but then you could do a passion project in between. You could start something that you love. That way you add something to the mix, so it's not just this open-faced loop where it's just always the same thing and it wears you out. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.